going to record this session so we can make it available on our YouTube channel after. And again, one more time, welcome everybody. I see some familiar names on the list here, so welcome back, those of you who are returning. So this is the, I guess, third training session we've offered this this sort of academic semester this spring. So we started with a basic training in JOSM. We did another one, which is more advanced JOSM. And then now this one is validation using JOSM as a tool as validation. So what's going to happen today is you'll see a presentation from Maxwell and Sarah about the validation process and workflow. There are times throughout the presentation when they will pause and give you an opportunity to ask questions. But as questions come up, please put them into the chat window and we'll address them as we go through as best we can. We'll also provide a little bit of a demo using JOSM and actually implementing the workflow. So the today's session will consist of not only sort of explaining what the workflow is, the established workflow for validation is, but then also sort of physically walking through a particular project in the tasking manager, pulling out a task and validating it using the tools in JOSM. And so we'll hopefully that will hopefully reinforce the actual workflow. As I mentioned, any questions you have, please put them in the chat. We'll address them as soon as we can, but there will be times as well when we will pause during the training itself where you can articulate your question verbally if you wish to do so. While training sessions are going on, I please ask that you all keep yourselves muted so we can all hear the instructors. And Joanna will be monitoring the waiting room. So if you do get kicked off and are trying to join back in, Joanna will be watching that to let you back in as soon as she can. Okay. So I think that's about it. The session will run for about an hour and a half. So we're in Eastern time zone here. So at 11 o'clock our time is when we'll sort of clue things up. But with that, I will put myself on mute and hand it over to Sarah and Maxwell to take it away.
Can everyone see the presentation?
Looks good, yep.
Right. Okay, great. Once again, we're so happy to have you all here. Today, we're going to talk about OSM validation with JOSM. And the main idea is to walk you through how we actually do validation with the help of this hot taxing manager or the teach taxing manager. Next slide, please. Before we go into it, I would like to start with explaining what a validation is and what actually we mean by validation in this workflow. So basically, talking about validation here is simply when an expert and more experienced mapper actually tries to look at the work of a more beginner mapper. And the main idea is you review the work of a previous mapper and then you check for accuracy and then also for completeness. So with doing that, what we are mainly looking for is checking if what is being said to be mapped in the project has been mapped. Is the location actually as expected on how it should be in the imagery? Are the tags correctly done? And these are the things that we are more interested in when it comes to validation in this kind of projects. And then the last bit is also to actually give constructive feedback to our mappers. And one of the ideas is to help them improve their mapping skills, at the same time encourage them to also come back and map. So with the validation process, basically we review an area that is mapped by a user. We will ensure that the task is complete. What is meant here is what is being said in the project is actually complete. For example, if the project is talking about mapping buildings and roads, you make sure that all what is said in the project has actually been mapped so that it can be mapped as complete. You also check for positional and target accuracy. So with the position accuracy, you make sure that if you are mapping a building, the building is actually in place of where it's seen in the imagery. And this actually ensures quality of data, as well as it allows people to easily use the data with no problems. And then, as I already mentioned, you give constructive feedback, and then you encourage mappers to continue mapping. For example, by saying, you thank the user for mapping, and then you encourage them to come back and map again. So in this one, the overall goal is to verify the quality of the data contributed to the OSM by the mappers. At the same time, you encourage the mappers to map, and then also give them constructive feedback so that they can improve their mapping skills. Next slide. So why is validation important, and why do we need to validate the work of others? So one of the main things is to ensure quality edits. So you map the area, you want to ensure that it's actually being mapped correctly. You want to ensure that within the projects that has been said, as I mentioned earlier, if the project focuses on mapping buildings and roads, you want to ensure that the objective of the project has been met. So you validate, and then you also ensure high quality of the what has been said to the map. One other thing is also about the data usability. We want to ensure that the data is of good quality so that it can easily be used. And then it has been known that when people validate the works, it improves the quality and also builds the confidence of the data so that other users, stakeholders, people can use this kind of data set to make informed decisions. Also, constantly increasing the number of projects and mappers using HOTS makes validation more important every day. The idea is when we constantly add more projects to it, and then projects is not only mapped by advanced, but then also beginner mappers also get the opportunity to do this kind of mapping. So we have to get more experience to actually clean it up and then improve the quality. Next slide, please. So now we'll be talking more about the validation workflow. And as I already mentioned, the idea is to look at a workflow in line with working within the HOTS or the Teach Task Manager. Next slide. So this actually gives you the full overview of the workflow that we usually use within the Validation Hub when we carry out a validation project. So the first thing is you read instructions for the tasks that you are trying to map. Usually the project will come out with a project description. It will state the objective of the project. It will also talk about the things that it wants you to map. So you will want to read them, understand what you are expected to validate from the task. So if the project is talking about mapping of only buildings, then you know that this validation task is going to be about mapping of buildings. So after reading the instructions, then first thing is you want to check for alignment of your data that you upload from the OSM database to JOSM. You have to make sure that it's aligned with imagery. And then you do that to make sure, because the reason is sometimes the imagery will not be the same imagery, or all data sets already existed. So there will be a little shifts, and then you want to align them. And then the next step is now you run the validation tool in JOSM, and then this will actually check for some quick errors and give you ideas of what kind of errors that you can already identify. I will talk more about it in the coming slides. And then afterwards, you do a detailed scan of the area to check for completeness and other major errors that should be fixed, like checking if all the buildings has been mapped in the area or within the task that you selected. If not, then you have to map them yourself. And then you upload your edits by also including change sets. And then you update the status of the map. If you completely validated everything, then you go back and you make it fully validated. And then you also give feedback to the mappers that contributed to the task. I want to also mention that we have useful plugins that makes our life easy. So I'm sure if you already joined our advanced JOSM, you could see some, but then we also try to highlight some within this workshop today. Next slide, please. So as I already mentioned, the first step of any validation tool is to read the instructions. So you need to review the instructions and actually know what is expected of you. One of the key things that you have to actually check for when you want to start any validation project is to look out for the imagery to use. Usually, most of the times, projects would actually propose the imagery to use. For example, they will ask you to use Maxa because it's the most updated recent imagery for the project. So if you are validating, that will be the best imagery to use. Of course, in practice, you can compare it with other imageries. You also look out in the instructions for which objects that you are to map, what is mostly comes from the objective of the project. If the project is focusing on mapping buildings and roads, then you focus on validating those key objects. Also look out for the tags that should be used. For example, if you are working in Africa, we have the African tagging. So you can also look at that. They also provide wiki links describing how things are supposed to be done. Like as I already mentioned, tags, how the tags are supposed to be done, how some features are supposed to be mapped. And then you have to read them, understand how the project actually wants things to run. And you can now move to the next step. Next slide, please. So with the align, so when you now, let's say you read the instructions and then the project asks you to use Maxa, the first thing is you scan the data set in JOSM to see if the object actually aligns with the background image, in this case, Maxa. If it aligns, then you don't need to align them using the offset. If it's not aligned, then you have to make sure that you align them. And then to do that, we have the adjust an imagery offsets tool under the imagery menu list. And then you can simply try to drag the imagery to fit into the data set. Of course, in practice, it will be more challenging as some areas will be aligned and other areas will not be aligned. But then the main idea is to try to align as much as you can, and then the others you can simply try to adjust the data set to fit it properly. Next slide, please. So when you now align the imagery, your next step is to validate, use the validation tool in JOSM. It is it's like a blue tick, which is usually on the left side, mostly for Windows. And the idea is you are going to check for some like typographical errors. and you will want to run the tool, and then it will give you some errors that it can easily be picked by this validation tool. And then it will select features that, so usually how you do is you select the features that you will want to run, and then you run it, and then it will come out with some errors if it identified any. And the errors are grouped into mainly different types. So we have like an error, which one, and those errors actually needs fixing, like a building is duplicated, a building is overlapping a building is overlapping a road. Those ones you have to fix them. You don't need to skip them. And then we also have like warnings. So with warnings, some of them you need to fix them. Some of them maybe you might not know, so you can decide to not fix them for now. For example of that is like unnamed ways. So when you are dealing with highways and then you are doing a validation task and you don't know the name of the road, then it becomes difficult to actually provide the naming tag for that particular road. So with those ones, it will come as unnamed ways, and you can simply ignore that. But then the main catch is for errors, you need to actually fix those errors. And those ones, you can't skip them. So basically when you run the validation tool, it will simply highlight these errors, and then it will group them into these categories that I already mentioned. So it will group them into errors, and it will group them into warnings as well. And you will use that to be able to follow that, use that to automatically check which areas to map. So you simply zoom into those areas, you assess the situation, and then you try to improve the quality of the map. Next slide, please. So after that is done, your fourth step is to actually do a visual scan and assessment of the issue. So here, the idea is to actually scan the all tags that you selected. So if you are dealing with buildings, you want to check if all buildings are mapped, or if some buildings are being mixed. If there's any missing buildings, you will want to add them by mapping them. If buildings are not placed correctly, you will want to adjust them and place them in the right location. Also, if building tags are not correct, you will want to improve the tagging. For example, the basic building tag is building is equal to yes. And if for some reason somebody made a mistake and then didn't provide any tags, you can add some tags to those ones. And also, if some buildings tags are not correct, you can improve them. So the idea is you check for, you visually scan the area, and then you try to improve the quality of the objects that the project seeks to map. Relating to the buildings, again, you want to make sure that all buildings are squared. If it's a circular building, you want to make sure that they are all round. If some buildings are glued to each other, you will want to unglue it. And then some of the shortcuts, as you can see in the slide, is Q to unglue, G to unglue, and Q to make buildings squared. And then you want to rotate the building, as I already mentioned, to adjust the building to fit into the imagery. For road checks, mainly you want to check if the roads are properly digitized. Are the roads connected to each other? If not, you'll want to connect them. You'll also want to check for overlapping of roads and buildings. And then you will want to also check if the tags are properly done. But then with the tags for roads and also for buildings, if you have the local context, then you can go ahead and do it. But then if you don't have the local knowledge, then you can ignore that for now. Next slide. So when you done with doing all this detailed checking and then making sure that everything is being mapped, sometimes you will want to make a decision on if you will want to continue and validate the projects and make sure that everything is fixed by you, or you will want to push back the projects back to the community or the mappers working on the projects to help you quickly improve the map. And then this is a simple diagram to help you in making decisions on either to send the project back for the mappers to fix them themselves, or you want to go ahead and fix them yourself. So one of the first thing you will want to decide is how urgent is the task that you're mapping. If the task is of high priority, then it's a good idea to simply fix it yourself and then try to improve the quality of the edits by yourself, and then take it as complete so that the data users can simply use it. If the task that you map in is of medium or low priority, then you will want to consider another step. So you will want to ask if when was the last edit made on this particular task that you are validating. If the task is more than a month old, then the likelihood of you getting the mappers to come back and work on it is going to be low. So you will want to go ahead and fix those errors yourself. So the idea is you will want, because sometimes the errors in the task might be too big for you to fix, and then you will want to get more people to help you to fix them. But then if the projects, those working on projects work on it, the last edit is more than a month ago, then it's likely you will not get like quick feedback to be able to support you in improving the quality of edit. So you just go ahead and try to fix everything yourself. If it's less than a month old, then you will now check how active is the users that actually work on this task. So you check if the users are quite active and then they can still work on the task, or they are very little active and not regular OSM users. If they are not quite active, then it's better you still go ahead and fix it yourself. However, if they are currently active and still working on the project, then you can kick back the projects into the taxing manager, and then you ask them to fix by selecting need more mapping option. And then if you fix it yourself, then you hit on completely validated option. Do you have any questions at this point?
If there's any quick questions right now, if you're on that, you can take yourself off mute and ask them directly if you like. If not, we will continue on with the next part of the presentation. Okay, we can just keep the train rolling. As questions come up, folks, remember you can just put them into the chat window and we'll address them as soon as we can.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll hand it over to Sarah to talk about the next steps in the presentation.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the common errors that you'll see when validating. The first one, and probably the most common one, is that you have buildings that are unsquared, and this is super easy to fix. You can just select the building and use the Q key to square them. There's also a super helpful plugin that I'll talk a little bit more about called the Mapathonner plugin, and that allows you to select all of the unsquared buildings at once and then square them all at once with the Q key. And that's important because, you know, in the real world, buildings have 90-degree angles, so obviously we want the data to reflect that. There are also sometimes issues with tagging buildings. So if nothing else, a building should be tagged as building equals yes. Sometimes people just don't know that tagging convention, or they add in extra tags. So they might say something like building equals area, but that's not correct. So you just want to go in and make sure things are being tagged correctly, especially if the project that you're validating is asking you to focus on buildings. Another one, sometimes when you're mapping buildings or roads that are close together, the nodes can get snapped together, but that's not what you want to have happen. So if you have building nodes that are accidentally attached together, then you can unglue them using the G key. And then after you unglue things that have been previously attached, you want to make sure that like your buildings are still square and that the roads are still aligned with the imagery in case ungluing them sort of shifted them around at all. Another issue is overlapping buildings. Obviously, that's not something that can happen in the real world. So that's a problem that will get highlighted by the validation tool. And you can, you can just move those apart from each other. And sometimes they might be glued together. You can just unglue them with the G key. Roads should also be connected together. So if you have two separate road or way segments, then you can add nodes until they're connected, and then use the C key to combine them and make sure the road is all going in the same direction. And the next one, unnamed ways. This is one of those warnings that Maxwell was talking about. If you have a road that you don't know the name of, then when you run the validation tool, it'll say warning, unnamed way. But this is something you can ignore, because unless you have no local knowledge, then adding in a name or saying that the road name is unknown is just going to cause more problems. So unless you know specifically the road name and you have that local knowledge, then you can typically just ignore this warning before you upload your edits. Again, buildings and roads shouldn't overlap, so you can just move those around manually. And duplicate features is another issue that will come up with the validation tool. And you want to do your best not to delete anyone's work. So if you come across a situation where, a building was accidentally mapped twice, or there's an extra line segment in there, then try to find another place for it in the imagery. Maybe there's an unmapped area where you can move that geometry to honor the work of the mapper before you. Okay. Oh, and this is sort of some more errors. This is sort of what I was talking about before. Sometimes people will see the warning for unnamed way and they'll, think they need to correct it. So they'll say highway name or name equals unknown or name equals road. But that's going to tell the JOSM software that the road is called road, which just isn't true. So you want to make sure that you just have your highway classification and no names if you don't actually know the name. Roads joined to buildings, they can be disconnected with the G key. And like I said before, you should make sure that any building that you're ungluing something from is still square afterwards. The JOSM search tool, it's a helpful way to find pretty much any selection. You can search for buildings that have 4 nodes, or something as simple as buildings equal yes. And when you put in your search, it will highlight all of the data within your task that matches your criteria, and then you can go and look at that data specifically. So I can show you guys where the search tool is when we get to our demo. Okay, so completely mapping an area, that's one of the most important things to do when you're validating. So you want to make sure that you've read the instructions completely, and if it's asking for buildings and roads, you want to make sure that all of the buildings and the roads in your task have been mapped and that they're properly tagged. If you see major errors, then you can fix them, or if like Maxwell said, if it's too much and there isn't a high priority on finishing the task, then you can maybe send it back later for more mapping and then come back to validating. But again, it's really important to refer to the instructions of the project as a whole and map all of the features that they want to have mapped and make sure that the tags are there and accurate. And then for spatial accuracy, you want to make sure that you're using the correct imagery and that it's aligned properly. And again, try not to delete any features because you want to honor the work of those who mapped before you. Okay, so using the validating tool is super helpful, and that's how you're going to find a lot of the most common errors that we were mentioning. And I can show you where the validation tool is if you're not sure in the JOSM window. But once you've run the validation tool a few times, you've used all of those plugins and you've done your visual scan of the task, you're confident that everything is correct and you've got all the data in there, then you're going to upload your edits and add a meaningful change set comment. So you can say something like fixed overlapping buildings or added roads, you know, something that's specific but also succinct and lets other mappers know what you did on that task. And also make sure to include the imagery that you used. Usually it will just automatically populate in this little area right here, but you can also just type in the imagery that you used yourself. And then you can upload your data and continue validating. And then in case that there are too many errors or there's too much area that's not been mapped yet, then you can decide to stop validating and send it back for more mapping. So in the tasking manager, you would say, no, this isn't well mapped or it's not completely mapped. And then it's really important that you leave a comment saying why you did that. You don't want to just say, oh, no, it's bad or move on. You know, say not too many unmapped buildings or, you know, just say whatever the problem is and let the people who were working on it before you know why you decided that it wasn't ready to be validated. And it's really easy to find out who was working on that task before. There's a history tab on the tasking manager, and this will show you all of the people who had been mapping on that task and the project before. So you can tag them and leave them a, you know, maybe constructive criticism, a kind comment saying this needs some more work before it can be validated. Alternatively, if you've done all your validation, everything's been mapped and tagged properly, and you think it's ready to be completed, then you can go into the tasking manager. And again, you want to leave a comment, but this time thanking the mappers for doing the work on the task. And then maybe if there were some small errors, this is a really good place to leave some constructive criticism like, hey, remember to square your buildings. And it's also helpful if you include specific instructions for those mappers, and that'll make them more likely to come back and map again and be more cognizant than if you had just said, hey, thanks. And again, even if there are no problems, it's nice just to leave a thank you message. I know I like getting emails that say, oh, thanks for mapping on this task. And again, you can look in the history tab to see who was mapping on that task and tag them specifically. And here are some message examples for you to refer back to. Those general ones I use pretty often when I'm validating. If it's just generally good mapping, or if you're not sure how to politely, you know, raise attention to an error that someone was making, then you can use some of these ones down below, like the square buildings ones. You know, just a quick reminder, make sure you use the Q key. These are just polite ways to help people make those corrections. Okay, so plugins are super helpful for validating because a lot of times you don't want to have to select each individual building or road and move it around manually. So just as a quick reminder, you can download plugins in the preferences window, and then the little icon that looks like a puzzle piece, that is going to be where you can download the new plugins. And you can also see which plugins you already have installed. The to-do plugin, it's helpful in that it provides like a general list of things that you should check or make sure you're looking for when you're validating, like, oh, is the imagery aligned, or are all of the buildings squared? And it's going to be a more general list of things to check on than if you had just run the validation tool. The scripting plugin, it is a way to sort of automate small tasks when you're mapping. There's a lot of different things that you can do with the scripting tool, but for validation specifically, you can find duplicate buildings or non-orthogonal buildings, and it'll select all of those and allow you to correct them all at the same time. And the Mapathoner tool is similar. Annika, who joined us from the Validation Hub, she loves the Mapathoner plugin, but basically it also allows you to select non-orthogonal buildings, and then you can square them all at once, or it even allows you to, create batches of buildings, so multiple buildings at once if there's like a large unmapped area. Super helpful. And then lastly, the Mark Scene plugin. It's a plugin that will add a window to the right-hand side, I think, of your JOSM editor, and it will highlight all of the area in the task or on your screen that you have panned over or scrolled over. So you can see, especially if it's like a large task, you can see the area that you've worked on or looked at already. It highlights it in pink, and then you can go, oh, this little corner doesn't have that Mark Scene plugin indication on it, so I know that I need to go over there and do my visual scan and see if there are any errors. And these are just a few plugins. There are tons and tons of them, but these are just a few that we find helpful when we're validating. And then these are links that you can refer back to after this presentation is over, notes on plugins and old validation training, helpful hints and stuff, and also old recordings of similar presentations to this. So before I start my demo, I'll let anyone ask any questions in the chat, or if you want to say them out loud, feel free.
Any questions from anybody? You're welcome to take yourself off mute and ask a brief question here. We can go and move on to the next bit.
Okay, I'll just go ahead and get started with the demo, but again, please feel free to ask any questions. Okay. Let's see, I gotta move this down a little bit. Sorry, there's like a Zoom bar in the way, so I can't see my. Okay, so this is the project that I've chosen for this little validation demo. And again, it's super important to read the instructions of the project before you begin. So they're not that specific here. It's just a note on, maybe for beginner mappers, they're saying map buildings, but then if you're comfortable, you can map the roads as well. And then you'll see here, they give you a link to how to properly tag roads in Africa. So, if you're just starting out, it's helpful to review those so you can sort of learn how different roads are classified. Okay, so I'm going to select my task here. Oh, also, one thing to note, these instructions, they didn't say which imagery to use, so that's something that you have to look out for when you're reading the instructions as well. Okay. So I already have my imagery loaded in here, but when you first load a task into the JOSM editor, it's good to go up here to the imagery tab, and you can pick different ones and compare them. And then another thing that you can do that Maxwell mentioned is you can use this imagery offset align tool And then because I have multiple imagery loaded in here, it's just going to ask me to select which one I want. And now I can shift the whole image around without moving the data. But I'm not actually going to do that because I think it was fine before, just from doing a little visual scan. And then I will say, if for some reason, so the validation tool is down here. It's just a little window that you can add. It's not a plugin, it's already in JOSM. But if for some reason it's not there when you open up the editor, or like you accidentally close it out, you can just add the validation tool back in by going up here to Windows and adding validation results. So I think my imagery is aligned okay. So I'm going to run the validation tool. And as you can see, these warnings will pop up. So you double click on that and you're like, oh, okay, crossing building and highway. And again, if you double click on it, you can right click and it will allow you to zoom right to where the issue is. And it highlights the buildings and the roads that are overlapping. So I would fix this by using this tool over here, the Improve Way Accuracy tool, which you can also access when you hit the W key on the computer. And this is a super easy way to fix your roads. Instead of adding nodes manually like this, I'm going to hit my W key, and now I can just hit Control and add points like that. And you can also move existing points around just by clicking. So I'm going to go down here and see this building is in the middle of the road. So I will, rotate it, shift it around like that. And then maybe add a few more nodes to my road here to make it align a little bit better. And now if I run that again, I have one less crossing building and highway error, but I go over here and see, oh, it's still over here on the corner. So I'm just going to go ahead and move the road. Okay, and then my next warning that I see here, crossing building and residential area. So this task was just focusing on buildings and roads, but someone has gone in and added residential area. Oh, it's pretty large. So I'm just going to move this node down here. Super simple fix. And now this is where we see that unnamed way error, but again, I don't have any local knowledge of this area, so I can't go in and add a road name, so I'm just going to leave that be. So I can do my visual scan now, and I can see that, these buildings aren't aligned in all places, so I would go through and fix all those buildings. I'm not going to do all of them right now, obviously, but then another thing to do, I'm going to start using my plugins that I was talking about. So the Mapathon plugin will pop up right here if you have it downloaded, and I'm going to select non-orthogonal buildings. And now if you have this selection window, it'll tell you where all of them are, or I can zoom out and they're all highlighted in red. So I can square all of those buildings at once by using the Q key. And now if I run the Mapathon plugin one more time, I still have an error. So all those other buildings, they got squared, but now I'm going to go see what this one is about. And this is a case where we have a building, one of them is glued to another. So I'm going to unglue that with the G key, sorry. And now I'm going to re-square both of these guys. So now if I run this again, I have no more unsquared buildings. So again, if I was actually validating this, I would probably go through maybe from top to bottom or just across the top and work my way down, doing my visual scan, and I would shift these buildings around so they aligned with the imagery better. And then if I decided that I was happy with all of my edits and I, followed all the instructions and looked at the tags, then I'm going to go up here to this green arrow to upload my edits. And this part is super important. You go up here to add your change set comment, and there's a lot of stuff already loaded in here, but this is task 1324. So I want to go down here to the end and say, this is what I was working on last night. So I would add YM hub. I was validating the buildings and roads, and I add the YM hub because I'm part of the validation hub. And then I would upload my changes. And now if I uploaded, then I would go back to the tasking manager and I would say, yes, this task is well mapped. And to leave a comment, I can look at the history and I can see Annika, she worked on this one. That's myself, I was working on it. So I go down here. These are all Validation Hub members, but I'll see this user marked it as mapped. So I would go back to my comments, add it, excuse me, tag them and say, hey, thanks for mapping. Make sure your buildings are squared and use the Q key. And then I would submit it as complete. Does anyone have any questions or anything they want me to show again in the JOSM editor in terms of validation? If not,
The steps that you would like her to go over again? So obviously, Sarah, with this particular one, because you didn't go through the entire validation process, you're not closing it out on the tasking manager just yet.
Yeah. So
yeah,
if I was actually going to do that, well, right now I'll say stop validation because it's obviously not complete, but then I could go back and continue to validate later.
awesome. Yeah, maybe let's walk through another example, starting with the tasking manager, so we can get the workflow of going, starting the tasking manager, and then moving through the validation process, and then back to the tasking manager. Because we have, we still have 35 minutes or so.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen then, and Maxwell can do the next demo.
Great. Thank you.
Great. Yeah. So I'll share my screen now. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay,
yep.
Perfect. So actually I selected another task, and then this task is mainly mapping for impact of poverty on education in Kasama districts. So the first step that I would take is to read the instructions. So in this imagery, they specified that you use Maxa Premium imagery, and that will be your default imagery to use. But then, of course, in practice, you will want to compare it with other images like Bing, Esri. If some part of the proposed imagery is not that clear, then you want to compare that and be able to make better judgments of the objects you're trying to map. And then, so this first part, they try to give a more detailed description on what they actually expect you to do. So first is on the imagery selection, and then they also say that you may switch to Bing or Esri or others to compare. But then, of course, they said Maxa is the chosen one for this because it is the most recent imagery according to their research, and then the data set that is available. But then, of course, in practice, you can always switch between the two if one of the imagery is not clear and then you want to make better judgments. And then also, I have already read this, so I'm not going to move through everything, but I want to highlight the most important steps. They also talk about the objects that you will want to map in this task. So here they mention about which kind of objects to map. And the first thing was on the building. So it says that learn OSM for detailed instruction of handling offsets. So as I mentioned, after you load in the imagery, you want to offset. So in this instruction, they also pointed out like how you can do offset. And I already saw Richard already posting how to do offsets in the chat. So you can also have a look at how you can do offsets. And then you can basically follow those steps to be able to do it. Then the first object to map is mapping of buildings. So they also give a detailed description of how they want this mapping of buildings to be done in this particular project. So they says that you have to map all the buildings. You need to make sure that they are correctly aligned. And then they also say the outline should be for a full size of the building. So what you see in practice is sometimes when there is a tree that is close to a building, the shadow of the tree might cover part of the building, but then you will have to be able to know that this is a full building, and then you want to make sure that the shapes are exactly correct. And then you take note of the building tags, and then also mention that you have to ensure that you use the kill key to make all buildings square if it's a rectangular or square building. And all these things, they also talk details about how the building tagging are supposed to be done. And then afterwards, they move to talk about highways. And then they talk a little bit about the highways to use. So they mention here about the major ways, and then they also gave how they will want you to do it. And then if you want more details, for example, they mentioned that highway is equal to unclassified if you are connecting, if the road that or the highway that you actually digitize is connecting a smaller village and a hamlet, then you use unclassified as the tagging scheme. However, if you use highway is equal to tertiary if the main roads are connecting towns. So you will have to actually read these instructions to know how you go about tagging these features. And if road network already exists, and then you have to also make sure that they are correctly aligned. And then for this particular task, for road tagging, they propose you use the East Africa tagging guidelines. So this will actually give you a guideline of map tags. I'm going to open that link, and then it gives you a broad overview of tagging of roads in East Africa, which might be a little bit different from tagging roads in other places. So you will want to spend some time to actually look at these tags to be able to understand what exactly you are supposed to tag and also do them properly. So I'll go back to the tags. So afterwards, they also mention if you have a local knowledge about the area, then you will want to add some valuable information only if you're 100% sure that the object you want to add this local knowledge is actually there. So you will want to do all these things, and then you will want to understand what the project is basically asking you to do. So in this particular project, the main task is to map buildings and then also to map highways. So I will make sure my editor below here, I will make sure my JOSM is my main editor, and then I'm going to select one particular task to be able to map. So when I do that, it will take me directly to JOSM. Can you see my JOSM?
Yes. Yep. You're coming in.
Okay. So when you load it, I'm going to make it smaller. I think I loaded twice, so I'm going to delete this one. So when I loaded it, the default one was Maxa, and then I also loaded Bin already to be able to compare because I like to compare if I don't see things properly. And then the first step is you want to check if the data set aligns properly with the imagery. So you want to zoom into some areas and check if it's aligning properly. And then if not, you want to offset the objects to actually align with the background imagery. For me, it seems it's not aligning properly as how I want it. So I will go to, wait, let me put this one below somewhere. So I will go to, on my menu bar on top, I'll go to imagery, and the imagery, we have imagery offset. And then because I loaded 2 imageries, JOSM is asking me, which imagery do I want to make offset to? And remember, the project proposed Maxa Premium imagery, so I will want to offset it to that. And then I can simply use this one as my guide and try to align it properly. And when I am convinced that, okay, it seems to be aligning perfectly, then I will hit on OK to make sure that everything aligns properly to this task. Afterwards, I will want to run the validation tool, which is this take the checkbox here. When I hit on it, it will open a window. I want to move this one a little bit far to the other side. And then I will be able to see my validation results on my right bottom corner. And then this is the validation results. And then when I run it, it will run, and then it will spell out the errors and then the warnings. In my case, when I run it, I get only one warning. So I will try to look at what kind of warning that is. And then it says that crossing buildings and or / highway. So I want to open that, select that, right click, and then zoom to the problem. So to simply take me to the problem, and then I will be able to know, okay, this is the problem that it needs fixing. And if the imagery is not clear, you can also switch to another imagery to check if also you will want to improve like the visibility of the imagery. You can also come here, increase the gamma a little bit to make sure things are properly, and then you are able to see them correctly. And then you know that, okay, this is the problem, and you will want to shift it a little bit from where it is so that the buildings don't overlap. When that is done, you can simply rerun the validation tool, and now that error is actually gone. And when that is done, the next thing is you want to do a detailed scan of the area to see if there are other problems to fix. You have already realized that the validation doesn't actually check for building, if buildings are squared or not. So as Sarah already showed, you can simply use the Mapatona tool to quickly check for non-orthogonal buildings by saying select all of them, and then it will simply select all of them for you. And then you can quickly check if it did a good job by selecting the correct ones. And then you can simply hit on the Q key to actually make them squared, to make them squared. So now I squared everything. And now when I go back and then it says select orthogonal building, you see it's not selecting anything. So now I have squared all the non-orthogonal buildings, and I've now made them squared buildings. But then you could also see that even though I did the offset, some areas didn't quite catch it well. So you have to manually do a detailed scanning by moving them to the correct location. Also, when you check here, you will want to make a decision if you will want to push back the data or you will want to continue on and validate it if it's of high priority. And if you remember the flowchart that I showed you, you can simply look at this and say, okay, they seem to be missing some buildings here and there. And then if it's a small task and then it's of high priority, you will want to quickly fix them. If you think that it's not of high priority and then those working on the projects are still active mappers, then you will want to kick it back to ask for more mapping. One of the things that you also want to check for is using the search tool, which is on the menu bar. You hit on the search tool and then you can search for buildings. Buildings equal yes, and then oh yeah, I didn't add an I here. Just one. Yeah, so I want to check if all the buildings is equal to yes. And as Sarah already mentioned, sometimes people tend to make mistakes, and then we'll want to make sure that the building tags are correct. So you can simply go to the search, and then by simply typing building is equal to yes, you are able to have an idea if all the buildings are equal to yes. And then you can simply quickly scan the area, and then you check if all buildings are actually equal to yes. If some of them are not, then you can simply go ahead and correct those mistaken ones. So at this point, do anybody have any question?
One thing, I'm glad you brought up the search tool, Maxwell, because if you typed in like building equals asterisk, it'll search all buildings. And then in the selection window, it'll tell you how many are listed as yes, how many are listed as house, or anything like this. You can also use it as a tool to identify all of those features with that key, but with different values, and be able to sort of run through them that way as well.
Okay, yeah, so on the set tool, you can also do buildings is equal to asterisk. This will actually select all anything related to building. So it is going to select everything, and in the result section, you'll be able to see everything is being actually selected from here, and you can simply check them, and then within that you can also you can say that find in selection, and then within that find in selection, you want to select building is equal to yes to make sure that you are actually selecting only those ones that are actually building is equal to yes. You can also do remove from selection, that if anything that is not equal to building is equal to yes should be removed from selection. This can also quickly give you a reverse of what is not building is equal to yes. And in this case, it seems everything is building is equal to yes, so we didn't get any error. But then assuming one of the tags happens to be building is equal to area, then it will actually highlight that, and you can simply use these kind of tricks to be able to actually manage the tags and make sure that things are correctly done. So in this task, I see that there are some few buildings that are being mixed. And then you can simply try to align the buildings. If some buildings are not in the right location, you align them. You can also rotate buildings by using the Shift and Control key to make it, and then you can rotate buildings. And these are simply trying to simply make detailed analysis of the area. You zoom in, and then you try to improve the quality of the work. And you can also add in the missing buildings in those areas that is missing. And so the whole idea is you check and then you improve the quality. And if you feel that the mappers are still active and then they can still work on it, you will want to kick back for them to quickly improve the map. Or if it's of urgent priority, then you go ahead and actually validate everything. Is there any more questions for me?
Any questions for Maxwell on this process and using the tools? Feel free to take yourself off mute and ask your question, or if you feel more comfortable, you can type it into the chat as well. But this has been great, Maxwell. Thank you, and Sarah. As Maxwell was showing, the search tool is can be a very powerful tool. You just need to learn how to sort of work with it. And when you're looking at features and then trying to identify features, there's lots of different ways you can use the search tool to really select out the particular features or issues with the tagging that can help you sort of really evaluate the data that you have. So I recommend that you guys spend some time, if you haven't already, looking at the search tool, playing with it, and looking at its functionality, because it can be very, very helpful in sort of validating the work that you have.
Yes, so I see a question if you can validate a tagging when you can do tagging when. Yes, you can. So assuming you want to correct this tag, you hit on that, and then you could see that this is the tag, and then you can simply edit it here and then try to correct the tags when you select the feature. So when you do your validation and you realize that some tags are not correctly done, you have to go ahead and correct them if you have the local knowledge. And if it's a generic tag that happens to be mistakenly done too, you can simply go ahead and fix those tags too. And also, although this is a huge task, but then sometimes it's not only one person that is working on the task. So if you happen to see one particular error that is coming out, you can simply select that, hit on the Control H, it will take you to the history, and you can simply note the user that made that particular error, so that when you are giving feedback, you can give more constructive feedback to like this particular user that if you are not squaring your buildings, then you will want to encourage them to square all their buildings by using the kill key. And then because sometimes it's not all the users that are not actually squaring their buildings, so you will want to make sure that you give more constructive feedback by just also checking the history and then noting the user so that you can simply tag them. Any other question? Okay, so when so in this case, I feel like there are some buildings that are missing. So I will not go ahead and make the validation, but then I'll want to also upload my edits. So I will hit on this upload key on the top right top left corner, and then it will take me to my upload. And then note that it will automatically populate the imagery that I use. But then if I am using both imageries, and then if I also included bin in making my decision, I also want to add, I will select bin. If I use Maxa, I want to select Maxa. And then I'll add my change set tags of what I exactly did, like validated buildings, and then I will want to add maybe YM Hub to show that I'm also working in the validation hub, and then I'll hit on upload changes to upload all my changes, and that will take me to upload my changes. But here I didn't complete the validation because I feel that there are some areas that are missing, and I will want them to do more mapping. And then I'll go back to my taxing manager, and then is it warm up? If I wanted to make it complete, I'll select yes. But then in this case, since it's not complete, I will select no, and then I'll hit on my comments. And then I can simply hit on the add key, and then it will give me the list of people that actually work on the project. And if I notice that this particular user, or I can simply say add this and add that, and then can add like, thank you guys for doing a great job by mapping, thank you for mapping. Remember to square your buildings and those kind of things. And then you can, so that is when you want to actually validate it, okay? But then if you don't want to validate it, you can say that some buildings are being missed, and then you will want to encourage them to come back and finish mapping, and then you hit on stop validating, or if you hit on submit, it will by default take this one to need more mapping. If you hit on validation, because in this case I don't want to send it to need more mapping, so I'm going to stop my validation. But then if I have to hit on the submit task, it will change from validation to need more mapping option, so that's, and then it also notify the users, and then they can also map. So we already mentioned how do you make the decision? So in this case, I realized that this particular user actually made this contribution 2 years ago. So the chances of me getting him back to work on the project is quite low. So if it's of a high priority project, then the best option is I will have to go ahead and then do my validation myself and improve the accuracy, add all the missing buildings, and then make sure everything is done properly. And then you also check for the other user, which is like 10 months ago. So they are quite old projects, and then it's likely that even if I put it to need more mapping, the chances of me getting them to work on it is going to be low. So maybe I'll just need to go ahead and validate it. Or if it's not of high priority, I can still kick it back, but then I have to, at the point, to come back and try to validate it. Does anybody have a question at this stage too?
Hello, good evening. Can you hear me, please?
Yes, I can, but I couldn't catch the last phrase. Can you repeat that again?
Okay, what I wanted to say is I've just logged in and I'm kind of late. Maybe if you can give some recap on stage 1 and you summarize stage 2, so that we will be at home.
Okay, great. Yeah, I can do that. So I'm going to stop validating. So the first step is basically to read the instructions. So you will want to read the instruction to actually know what the project is all about, what they are trying to map, what kind of objects that you need to look out for when you are actually doing the validation. So in this particular project, the first thing is they mention about the imagery to use, which they propose Maxa premium imagery. And that is the imagery that you will use for this particular project. Of course, you will have the flexibility to compare it with other images, but then the proposed imagery that they want you to use is the Maxa premium imagery. And afterwards, the thing you have to also look out for is what kind of objects that they want you to map. So here they are focusing on mapping of buildings, and then they try to give a detailed description of how they want you to do the mapping. And then you have to make sure, like they mentioned, like making sure buildings are being squared. They also talk a little bit about the tagging of buildings. And then you have to read all these instructions to be able to understand that. And then you also mention about major roads. where they also took. So here, this project, the main objective is we are going to map buildings, we are going to map major roads or highways. And then for major roads, they went ahead to give you how you should do the tagging. So they also mentioned about highways equals unclassified, and this you use this tag when the particular route that you digitize is connecting smaller villages and hamlets. Highway is equal to tertiary when you are mapping, when the road is connecting to towns. And then they also provided a detailed tagging scheme where they proposed that this project, we should use the East Africa tagging guidelines for roads. And then that will give you a broad description on how the tagging is supposed to be done. So they went ahead and they talked a little bit about the change sets here, and then also mentioned if you have local knowledge and you are completely sure, you can add them. So here they mentioned that this is the change set that you need to use, but then this is the general change set for the project, but then you can go ahead and also add the change set briefly describing what you actually did. So if you added a road, you adjusted the shape of a building, you try to add other things, then you will have to add it as part of the change set, but then you have to make sure that this is the default change sets that they will want you to use for this project. And then you read more about the project and then what they seeks to do. So when that is done, then now you have an idea of what they want you to do. So this project, we now know that we are going to focus on roads and then also mapping of buildings for this validation. So you select the blue tag, which is the valid. So this is the legend, and it shows you which one is ready for validation. So you select those ones that are ready for validation, and then you will now make sure that your editor is in JOSM because that is what I'm using, and then I can validate selected tags. So when I hit on that, it will simply load my work into my JOSM editor for me, and then I will be able to now see them. And then the first thing you will want to do when you load it is to check if the objects that you're trying to map is in the exact location of the imagery. You want to make sure that the imagery aligns with the object. So you zoom into the area to show, okay, these buildings seems to be aligned. You move to other areas to also check if they are also aligned. If they are not aligned, then you need to make sure that you align them. And how do you do that? You go to the menu bar on the top, and then you select imagery. And the imagery, we have the imagery offset. So in this case, I will want to do my offset based on the Maxa premium imagery. So I'll select that option, and now this adjust imagery offset tool will open, and now I can simply zoom into the area and make sure my offsets are done properly. I can also check for other areas to make sure everything is done properly. And if I am convinced that this alignment is done properly, then I can simply hit on OK to make sure that now I have done my step of making sure that my objects have been aligned properly. And now every edit that I will do, it will make reference to that particular imagery. Does that answer your question?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So when you do that, then you can simply run the validation tool, and then usually if there's an error detected, it will come in the results section here. And then so you run a validation tool on the left corner. Maybe if you can see my mouse here, and then this is that check thing, and then the results often come. For me, my setup is it come at the right bottom corner where I get my validation results. And for assuming if I put a building overlapping one building, and then I run the validation tool, then I will get this warning. And the warning says that overlapping buildings. And I can simply zoom into that particular one and then say zoom into the problem to take me to the problem, and then I can simply fix that problem by putting it at the right location. And when I'm done, I rerun the validation tool again, and now that problem is fixed, so I don't get any problems to deal with. But then you have to understand that the validation tool only try to look at this kind of topographical errors. So you will want to also do a more detailed scan of the area to make sure that all the other sections are also correctly done. So by scanning, I also see that some buildings are not being mapped. So I can simply go ahead and then start adding these buildings to it. And if I see that some areas are not correctly done, you can also do it. And as I already mentioned, you can also use the search tool to also quickly look at features that are not tagged properly, and then you can simply correct all those things before you go ahead and validate the project. Any more questions?
We've got about 3 minutes left until we're at time. Is there a brief question that we can get into before we close things up for the day? Awesome. Thank you, Maxwell. Thank you, Sarah. As you guys see that the validation process is sort of just an established workflow by the community that we're trying to follow here. And it's essentially taking your experience with using and editing in OSM and making sure the edits of other people are as accurate as they can be. So using tools in JOSM, we're able to look at, as Maxwell was just showing, all those topological issues when there are buildings crossing buildings or roads going through buildings. That's one issue. But then, of course, the tagging issue, we need to sort of correct. We need to correct as well and search for the potentially incorrect tags. And then, of course, visually, we need to use our eyeballs to make sure things are positionally accurate, to make sure the building footprints are actually over the building where they are on the imagery, making sure that the roads are in the street center lines of the actual roads in the imagery. And of course, we're taking the lead, taking the information we're looking to validate from the tasking manager. So we're starting with the tasking manager. That will tell us what we're sort of looking to validate. And then once we work through JOSM, work through the actual data itself for that particular task, once we've made our decision on the validate or invalidate, we go back to the tasking manager and then sort of finish out, close it out at that stage. So there's a lot of moving parts, and it takes a little bit of practice sometimes to get through the entire workflow. This training will be made available as well as slides once we've finished recording, and it's available in Zoom. You'll get an email from info at YouthMappers about it being available to you guys. And of course, we also have resources on our website, and under the Validation Hub page at the bottom, there's a number of resources where we actually have the training documents, not only for JOSM, but also for the entire validation workflow and how to actually learn to validate, and reminders of what to look for and what the workflow actually is. So there are lots of resources that are available. Some of the training we've now made available in Spanish as well. So hopefully that will make it easier for some of our Spanish speaking folks to be able to advance their skills, not only in JOSM, but also as a validator. Any other comments from Sarah, Maxwell, Joanna, Annika, any of the hub members that to include? No, you guys are all good?
Yeah.
Awesome. I see there was one question there, elaborate more on after validation. How do you submit the validated results? Very quickly, once you work through JOSM and you push all your edits that you've made up to the OSM database, you go back to Tasking Manager, and then remember the task that you selected is locked. It'll remain locked until you unlock it by saying, yes, this task is completely well mapped, or no, it's not. And it's at that point when you say, if everything looks good and you've corrected all the little mistakes that are in that particular task, once you've done that and uploaded that information in JOSM, going back to the tasking manager, you can check the box to update the status of that task and say, yes, it's well mapped. Leave a comment thanking the mappers for their time and their editing. And then once you submit it, that task now changes from light blue to dark green, indicating that it has not only been fully mapped, but also now been validated. And then that allows everybody else working on a project to realize and to know that that project is now complete, or that task is now complete. So it is a bit of a flow and a bit of a process, starting with one place, going to another, going back. So starting a tasking manager, going to JOSM, going back to tasking manager. But it is all laid out in the documentation that we have on our website. And as I mentioned, this training, as well as the slides, will be made available to everybody at some point, hopefully in this week or early next week at the latest. Okay, and we're at time. Actually, it'll run a little bit over, so I apologize for running over everybody. I'm sure everyone has a number of other things they need to get to today. So thank you very much for your attention today, for everybody calling in. We really appreciate you guys coming in and sharing your questions and sharing your time with us today. Thanks very much for your time, and we'll host some more trainings over the summer, so keep a lookout on the various media platforms that YouthMappers is on. We'll make announcements for those as they become available. So until then, be safe and take care of yourselves, and we'll see you guys again next time. See ya.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks for coming. See you guys.